So I want to thank you all for joining. I see that some of you are joining are pretty familiar with IHE Ro already, but so people understand what this webinar is for, it's an introduction, an overview of what we're trying to do in IHE Ro, a bit about how we work, a bit about how we're organized, and a bit about how we need information and input from people to help us along in getting accomplished the things the whole team wants to accomplish. I am one of the planning committee co-chairs, and in a little bit we'll talk about what the planning committee does. One little point do want to bring up in case somebody's working on their keyboard, nobody's doing that now, but in case you join and you're working on your keyboard, please mute your connection so that we don't have an issue with the keyboard interfering with people's ability to hear. So let's get started. This is basically what I said we were going to try to do today, is take a look at the structure, take a look at how we do things, and take a look at how somebody can participate and help out with the goals of IHE and specifically IHE Ro. And what's IHE? And this is right off the IHE website. But what it really is an attempt to improve the interoperability for the exchange of electronic information. And it is throughout the entire healthcare enterprise. It is not specifically for radiation oncology, although what we're going to talk about today is specific to radiation oncology, but IHE is much bigger than that. And what IHE does is not write brand new standards, but they use established standards, and I think of it as a standards refinement to improve the interoperability. And the standards are DICOM and HL7 are the two we work with most of the time. IHE Ro is really the concepts of IHE being applied to radiation oncology. And again, we really don't do a whole lot with medical oncology. This is specific to radiation therapy and radiation oncology. The group goes back to 2004, and we'll get into the composition of the committees and the type of people who are typically involved. But again, RO just stands for radiation oncology. Why is it important? Why do we think it's important? So that everyone on these committees are all volunteers, and why do they devote their time to that? It's because we really do believe that implementation of IHE Ro and compliance with the profiles will help safe transfers of information, safe and effective transfers of information in radiation oncology. Part of that, in the second point here, mentions that it promotes discussion for the protocols, and people talk about what is best for accomplishing the use cases that we come up with and that we really want to implement. And the third point as a vendor, because I'm the vendor co-chair, is the most important for me actually, because we do real-world testing with real systems so we can see how the interoperability works and what problems we have at our connect-a-thons. And we'll get into that a little more in a little bit. And this is a real example of a discussion from the technical committee. When we talk about, one of the things we talk about is source position. And for high dose rate source position, the position is of critical importance, of course. And so when you talk about, well, what's the position of the source? Is it the tip of the wire? Is it the middle of the active source? That difference could be significant when it comes to planning. And this is one of the things that IHE works out, IHE Ro works out, is what's the agreement for what's the definition of the position of the source. It sounds trivial, but it actually is kind of important for accurate dose calculations. One of the other things we make sure we do when we're implementing a new use case is we come up with a clinical impact statement, and that's so to help people understand what we're doing and the rationale of why we think it's important, and then what's the impact to the real clinical world for the things that we implement for the use cases. This is one for ARTI, Advanced Radiation Therapy Interoperability. We'll talk a little more. I use this example several places. If you take a look, you have two authors on this. One of them is a member of a vendor, And the other one is actually a physician, and we normally try to involve physicians in writing the clinical impacts, physicians or real clinical physicists, to make sure that we have things right. And these are posted for people to read and discuss with us and help us refine things as needed. And I mentioned again that it's a refinement of the standards. The two standards, as I said before, are DICOM and HL7. The reason we may say DICOM needs some refinement, and I don't mean to pick on DICOM, after all, I am a member of the DICOM Working Group 7 for radiotherapy. I strongly believe in supporting DICOM, but I'm sure if you've been in the clinic, you've seen situations where you have two systems that are DICOM compliant, but yet don't fully communicate with each other. They aren't truly interoperable. And those are the type of things we look at in IHE. Those are the type of problems we try to solve. So the scope of what we do, as it says here, we're interested in workflow, we're interested in operability, and through improving those things, we do believe that we'll improve patient care and improve safety, reduce errors. The sponsor for IHE Ro was originally ASTRO, but in the beginning of 2017, the American Association of Physicists in Medicine reached an agreement where they're now the overseeing body for IHE Ro, but ASTRO is still significantly involved. And as mentioned before, the group's been around since 2004, and we have people on the committee involved in committee work, from many different countries around the world. It is an international effort. The committees we have are the steering committee, the planning committee, and the technical committee. The steering committee is the oversight committee. It's also the liaison with the AAP leadership to make sure that the groups get what they need and support from AAPM. The two co-chairs from this are Bruce Kern and John Buati. Jill Morton is the secretary. She's the secretary for all the groups. And this committee consists of Bruce and John and the co-chairs of the planning committee and the co-chairs of the technical committee. The planning committee. On the planning committee, we have vendors and we have users. And the goal of the planning committee is to come up with the use cases. So we solicit information from, or solicit problems from clinical sites, come up with use cases for that, have a discussion about them, and then we rank them, prioritize them, and then pass them off to the technical committee for them to evaluate to see if they could implement them. And additionally, we develop education materials, such things as a webinar, or work with the technical committee in presentations at AAPM, as I know happened 2 years ago. The co-chairs are Bridget, who's the physician, member of the chairs, Alf, who's the physicist, and myself, who's the vendor representative. And the planning committee normally has the three. Now, the technical committee, to me, is where the rubber meets the road. These are the people that check to see if they're supporting standards and how feasible it is to put together a profile for those use cases, and also really do the work, figure out all the details of how that use cases, how that profile is going to be defined, how it's going to be implemented. That group tends to be a little more vendor heavy because it's about the implementation and, in a sense, engineering that needs to be done, but we do have users with technical experience, clinical users, and those are very important in order to make sure we get things right when we do this. The two co-chairs are Chris Power and Scott Hadley. Chris is out of Sun Nuclear, and Scott is a physicist. So the Oversight Committee coordinates things and works with AAPM. Planning Committee, to me, is on the front end of the process, generating the use cases and prioritizing them based on the input we get. And then the Technical Committee is the one that checks the feasibility and then begins and finishes implementing those profiles.